بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. By the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal, we come together yet again to speak about the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the popular hadith on Niyyah, on the subject matter of Niyyah. And in the previous class, we discussed, in a little bit of detail, the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala. So we, dedicated the class pretty much to the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala. Now today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll take a look at the actual text of the hadith. So the hadith is always divided up into two different things. There's what they call the isnad, the narration, the chain that leads up to what is called now the actual text or the matan of the hadith. So there's the body, and then there is an isnad that leads up to the body. So in the previous class we looked at the isnad as well slightly, and I remember I mentioned that the isnad of this hadith is gharib. Right, the chain of narrations in this hadith is strange, and that means that there was one narrator narrating the hadith in a certain part of the chain, and we mentioned that part was where, right after Umar ibn Khattab, there was, or after the Sahabi who was also one, there was three different recurring tabi'een that were all narrating from one another, okay. And there was no one next to them. And I mentioned that amongst the unique qualities of this hadith also is the fact that the chain is not only gharib, but it also is a special type of gharib where everybody that's narrating from each other, one another, as in specifically speaking, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari, who narrates from Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Taymi, who narrates from Alqamah ibn Waqqas al-Laythi. All of these people are all tabi'een and they're narrating from one another. And in that specific level of the chain. So for example, from the groups of people that are students of Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Taymi, there's no one narrating this hadith except Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari. And similarly, from the people that are students of Alqamah, there's no one narrating except Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Taymi. But that doesn't undermine the fact that they're all still what? Tabi'een. Because tabi'een are different levels. They're tabi'een that were during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, but they never got to meet him, and then they met the Sahaba afterwards. And there's those that died not long after that. There's those that came much, much later. So for this reason, there is three different, and sometimes it even goes up to four different tabi'een narrating from one another. Now looking at the text of the hadith, the text of the hadith is as such. It says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, all actions are based on what? They're based on their intentions. In this particular text of the hadith, in this particular isnad, with this particular isnad that was mentioned by Bukhari and others, the word a'mal, actions, it came plural. The word niyat also came plural. And in other narrations, you will see that the word niyat is singular. Okay? So it's not intentions, it's intention. And in other narrations, you'll see the word action is singular. So where are all these differences coming from, and what exactly is it trying to say? What it's trying to say is that in the narration that has both actions and intentions in plural form, what's happening here is that the Prophet ﷺ is telling you that for every single action, there is an intention that goes along with it. So it's what they call in Arabic muqabalatul jam'i bil jam'. It's when you take jam' and then compare it with another jam'a. Take a plural and compare it with another plural. Basically what's being said is that if you pray salah, that has a particular intention. If you give zakat, that has its own intention. If you give sadaqah, that has its own intention. If you fulfill a prayer that is fard, that has another intention. If you fulfill a prayer that is not fard, rather it's sunnah, that has its own intention, and so on and so forth. So the point of the matter is that every action has what? Has a specific intention. Now here's something that needs to be noted. When the ulama speak about the hadith of niyyah, usually the ulama, they speak in different ways. And you guys are all students of knowledge. So the way they speak about the hadith of niyyah is that some ulama will speak of it in terms of the admonition therein. So they will talk about how a person has to what? Purify his intention only for the sake of Allah, so on and so forth. All of these things. Other people, other ulama, will take the same hadith and they'll talk about another aspect, and that's the aspect of fiqh. Because niyyah has a lot to do with fiqh. Like for example, you have Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, or the Shafi'iyya at large. They look at the same hadith. And you have the Hanafiya, or Al-Imam Abu Hanifa. They look at the same hadith and they both translate it in their own manners. So Imam Abu Hanifa will come and he will say, إِنَّمَا كَمَالُ الْأَعْمَالِ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Or the Hanafiya will come and they'll say that verily it's only the completeness of actions that occurs through what? Through intention. So what he's trying to say is that you don't necessarily have to have a niyyah for something like, al-wudu. You don't have to have a certain intention, but for the completeness of this action, and for this action to be even more fruitful in the hereafter, you'll have to have what? An intention. Actually intend that I'm purifying myself for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, so that I can go pray salah. Now, on the contrary, you have Imam Shafi'i, or the Shafi'iyya, they'll say no. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ really doesn't mean إِنَّمَا كَمَالُ الْأَعْمَالِ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. It really means إِنَّمَا صِحَّةُ الْأَعْمَالِ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, it's nothing but the actual acceptance of the actions that occurs with the intentions. Do you see the difference? Who understands the difference? So according to the Hanafiya, you don't necessarily have to have an intention for an action to be accepted. It's not a condition for you to have an intention, for the action to be accepted. Whereas according to the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila and some of the other ulama, you have to have a specific intention for every single action. So, for example, a person wakes up in the morning. So now we're talking about this hadith fiqhiyan, in terms of the fiqhi aspects. Then we'll get to the other parts as well. A person wakes up in the morning, and naturally he's used to waking up in the morning and going straight to the sink. It happens to me. I'll attest to it. I wake up in the morning at times, and naturally you're used to doing what? Going and getting up and making wudu. Sahih? But at times you haven't even intended that wudu. Or sometimes you go to the sink to wash your hands, and you don't even think to yourself that I'm making wudu, and you end up finding in the middle, because you're thinking about something else at that point, and you naturally find yourself cleaning your feet, and then you're like, hold on, what's going on here? And then you realize that you ended up making wudu. So is this wudu acceptable? Huh?
Yes.
Why is it acceptable?
The intention was to pray.
No, he didn't intend to pray.
I vote no.
He had no intention.
No, the intention was to purify.
But the intention come in the middle, sir.
Where did it come in the middle?
You said, oh, I forget that I want to do so.
No, you do it in the morning. It's a common habit. You did it because of salah, right?
Raise the hands. Yes.
He is waking up in the morning, making a wudu because he has to go for the salah. So he.
Okay, forget the morning. You're taking a nap after dhuhr.
Let's just say you got up for office, you just get up at 7 o'clock get ready to the office and you just habitually just went to the same
Yeah, it's just habitually, naturally. You just went to, or you just finished eating and you went to go clean your hands. But then all of a sudden you find your feet in the sink as well. So, is this considered a wudu? The answer is no. Because at this particular moment, the individual, this is according to the Shafi'i, and this is probably the better opinion, that in this particular moment, the individual never really intended to have anything. And the Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّات. Verily all actions are based on intentions. And if a person doesn't have an intention, then is he going to get the same, action? Or is his, what they call ritual impurity going to be raised? Hadith. Is it going to be raised? The answer is no. In this particular case, it won't be raised. طيب. And also, another thing that niyyah does for actions is what they call تمييز العبادات أو تمييز رتب العبادات. تمييز رتب العبادات. So there's two different, the ulama describe niyyah to have two different roles, sometimes in fiqh. There's other roles as well. One of the roles is تمييز العبادات بعضها عن بعض. That it defines ibadat, and it sort of like differentiates between two different acts of worship. So you have a person giving zakat, he can't have the intention of praying salah, which is obvious, right? Which is obvious, but this is something that niyyah does, right? Similarly, it also, changes the levels. It also differentiates between the levels of the action. So you might have a 500 riyal bill that you're donating to a guy on the street that's asking. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, very generous brother. So you might be donating this to a person on the street. Now, had you intended zakat, it would have been zakat. But if you don't intend zakat, what happens? Can you go and later on make your re-intend and say format, delete, and then reinstall or whatever? That's for safe there.
I was just thinking, if you're done that, it's like you're giving someone money and then it's like, should have given zakat. Never mind.
Alhamdulillah, you give sadaqah. طيب. So there you are. So similarly, salah. Do you intend the same thing in your mind? You don't necessarily have to say it, but in your mind, do you intend the same thing when you are, for example, when you're praying the 2 sunnah before Dhuhr or the 4 sunnah before Dhuhr? Do you intend the same thing as you would for the actual salah? No, of course. So it differentiates between the different levels of actions as well. Some things are wajib, some things are otherwise. Some things are, mustahab, other things are, wajib. So these are, this is looking at it fiqhiyan. And as I mentioned in a previous class as well, Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah mentioned that the hadith of niyyah, it actually, takes effect into over 70 different chapters of fiqh. So it has a lot to do with fiqh here. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then continued, and he said, وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. And for every person is that which he intended. Okay, for every person is that which he intended. Now, to sum it up, the ulama, they spoke about these two statements in extensive detail. Whether both of the statements mean the same thing and the Prophet ﷺ is just trying to, emphasize, or whether each statement has one meaning, and what if each statement has a different meaning, and if each statement has a different meaning, what is the two different meanings? So these, things can be found in pages of knowledge. But to sum it all up, some of the scholars, they said both statements mean the same thing. All actions are based on your intentions, and for every person is that which he intended. He said the Prophet ﷺ is just trying to clarify, and he's just trying to emphasize the concept of intention. And other scholars said no, the first thing is referring to what we spoke about earlier. Okay? The first thing is referring to what we spoke about earlier, and how for every action there must be a specific intention. Okay? The second thing is referring to the admonition aspect of it. And the fact that every action actually has to be intended for none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So, that's where the whole concept of ostentation or ar-riya comes in. That's where this whole concept of ar-riya and how it's impermissible in Islam and how it can lead a person to being devoid of all ajr from the deed that he's doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Hadith Qudsi, He said, أَنَا أَغْنَى الشُّرَكَى مِنَ الشِّرْكِ. He said, I am the most, I'm not in need in the least of a person to make shirk with me, to associate a partner with me. So if a person stands up and he's praying salat, and he's doing with all due khushu'. There's a story of a man, he was standing there praying with all due khushu', just as we said, he's crying, and it's like... By the way, sometimes people get too into khushu' and they start going like this. Have you seen that? No, not the hands. I'm not referring, that's a whole other issue. I'm referring to just like this. Has anyone seen that? Let me stand up. The people watching the video might not see this, but let me just, they'll go like this. You see? This is actually a posture that's not supposed to be done. Because what it does is, it does something that's not supposed to be there during prayer time. And that's what they call taqawwus al-dhahr. When the back becomes like a bow. Right? Your back sort of bends like that. Or it almost looks like a hunchback. So that kind of positioning in salah, it's not supposed to be there. So a person should stand with khushu' if he wants to put his face down, and that's what he's supposed to be doing. But to make that back like that, and in this kind of a thing, that's not necessarily required for a person to do. And that's not necessarily appreciated. But people do it because they're in that mode at that point, right? In either case, a man was standing and he was praying, and with all this khushu', he's crying, and there's tears going down his cheeks, and people in the back, they're going. So what are they saying? They're saying, subhanallah, this guy prays so well, mashallah, tabarakallah, this, that, and this is found in some books, the story. He's playing so well. So, though it looks on the outside that this person is doing such a great deed, right then he turns around and he said, by the way guys, I'm fasting as well. So, and this is a story mentioned, wallahu alam if it's true or not, but the point of the matter is that's what they call ostentation. He realizes that people are talking about him, so he's like, subhanallah, I really am pious, I'm the man. No. So this kind of a thing, is not acceptable. So some of the scholars, they said the second part of the hadith, wa alaikum salam, is actually referring to these aspects of niyyah, which are also known as al-ikhlas, sincerity. So, the scholars of what they call al-wa'ad, admonition, they would speak about this hadith wa'diyan, in an admonishing manner. Whereas the scholars of fiqh, they talk about it, deriving different fiqh rulings, and the Prophet ﷺ's statements are in a manner that every person can take what he needs from it. There was a story that I wanted to mention, and to keep things short, it's a story mentioned by, Ibn Abi Dunya in his book Makaid al-Shaytan, attributes it to Al-Hasan, and it's also mentioned by some other, writers, authors over generations. It could be from the Israeliyat, it could be from the Israeli traditions. Allahu A'lam. But the story is mentioned and has a very good message around it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Hadithu an bani Israel wa la haraj." That you should you can say the statements of Banu Israel and there's no problem, so long as those statements don't come into contradiction with with Al-Islam. Because if they don't go into contradiction with Islam, then we don't necessarily have a problem. And the scholars, they divided the traditions into 3 different categories, but that's another subject. So, the tradition is as such: there was a pious man, a pious slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, and it was probably, from Banu Israel, the slave, if the tradition is an Israeliyah. He was a slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, and he would, worship Allah day and night with good intentions. We know that he had good intentions. He would do it for Allah Azza wa Jal. And then, as time went by, he heard from some people that there is a group of people, they started to commit shirk. They're worshipping a tree in place of Allah Azza wa Jal, because worship is supposed to be directed to Allah alone. So they started worshipping this tree. So now someone that is spending his days, his nights only for Allah Azza wa Jal, when he sees shirk, it really affects him. That someone is taking the due rights of Allah Azza wa Jal and directing them in the wrong direction. So this man, he got up and he knew that, if he did something to the tree, there could be consequences. He got up, he started walking, and as he walked, he wanted to go there and cut the tree off. As he walked, Iblis appeared for him in the shape of a man. It's a popular story, a lot of you might even know it. Iblis appeared for him in a shape of a man. And then, as the person was walking, he didn't know it was Iblis, Iblis came to him and he said that if you were to go and cut this tree, إن قطعتها عبدوا غيرها فارجع إلى عبادتك. If you were to cut this tree, they're going to go and find another tree to worship. So why don't you just go back? You're probably doing better anyways if you go and stay in your house and worship Allah Azza wa Jal. Nobody's going to bother you. Nobody will say anything to you. So this man said, no, there's no way. I'm going to have to go and cut this tree. So Iblis, of course, Al-La'in, he doesn't want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be worshipped. The enemy of the believers, Satan, he started to literally have a brawl with this individual. As we know, in terms of physical strength, jinns have probably more power, but they're weaker mentally, and they're more childish and these kind of things. So now, but over here, this is a worshipper. He's not like a bodybuilder or something, So when this brawl occurred, when this fight occurred between Iblis and this man was able to overcome Iblis. Why? We'll find out why. And then the story continued. He spoke to Iblis. Again, he doesn't know it's Iblis. He appeared in the shape of a man. And the story continued. And the man said, this man, Iblis, he said to this worshipper of Allah Azza wa Jal, you're a poor man. You're a poor man. So if you go home and you stay at home, they're not going to bother you. Nobody's going to say anything to you. And I'll come for you every single day and I'll put 2 dinars under your pillow. Every single day. So he woke up the first morning. He went home. He said, Khalas, you know what? This guy is going to give me 2 dinars. I'm worshipping Allah. I'm not doing something bad. I'm going to go home. He goes home and he goes to sleep. In the morning he wakes up and he finds under his pillow 2 dinars. So it's like, this is pretty good, Alhamdulillah. Worshipping Allah, not doing something haram. And here it is. I'm getting 2 dinars for it now. So Iblis is paying him to worship Allah Azza wa Jalla. Look at the makayid of shaitan. Literally. Because he wants those people to go and commit shirk. This is how beloved shirk is. To Iblis. And then the story continued. The next day, the man wakes up again. He finds some money under his pillow. And he's like, okay, this is good. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. He's doing a transaction with Iblis, and alhamdulillah, Now, the third day he wakes up, and he looks under his bed, or looks under his pillow, and he finds no money. So what do you think happened to him? He's enraged. That's a better word. Yeah. So, he's angry. He's enraged. I like that word. He's enraged. He gets up and starts walking. He goes to the tree. He's going to go cut the tree. And as he's going to the tree, lo and behold, there's Iblis right here, in the shape of a man again, and he comes and says, "What do you think you're doing? Boy, didn't I tell you I'm going to give you $2? He said, "You didn't pay me yesterday." No, that didn't occur. So, this time along, Iblis came, and right away, the fight started, and Iblis was able to overcome this man at this point. And then the man was shocked. He said, "I thought I was powerful. I felt like, when you have a fight with somebody and then there's it's not like even a 50-50 or you're almost about to win. You really beat the guy. Next time you're pretty confident that you're going to be able to beat the guy. You're going to be able to take care of this dude. Like Hamza, when Umar al-Khattab was walking. He's like, "Don't worry, I got it, guys." So, this fight, Iblis wins. So the man said to him, he said, "Well, what's going on? I beat you so badly last time and now I can't even fight you." He said, "The last time that you came solely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this time you came because of your own anger. And because of what? Huh? Because of the money. Because of the money."
Iblis says this.
Yes. The Prophet ﷺ said about Iblis to a certain story that occurred. He said something good. He said something right, correct. So he said, "Sadaqak wa huwa kadhub." He said, he told you the truth and he's a liar. In a true narration, in a sahih narration, about another issue. But the Prophet ﷺ told that Sahabi when he came and brought that information to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Sadaqaka wa huwa kadhub." He told you the truth whilst he's a liar. So the point of the matter is, he could have been telling the truth because he knows what's right. He knows, he's a alim. That's the reality of it in terms of information. He's been living around. He knows information. He knows people. He knows how things are. He's done a good study of the market basically. So he's been around the block. And that's why Abu Sulaiman al-Darani said, "Tuba, Tuba." He said, Jannah is for the person who even one step of his is done for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because it's when you do an action solely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, does the athar or the impact of that action continue. And it's only when you do it for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, does Allah Azza wa Jal help you throughout, concluding that action. And over here is a prime example. This man, when he came walking enraged in Allah's sake, for Allah's sake, and no other reason, even when Iblis came his way, what happened? He was able to overcome it. And this hadith, as I said, or tradition is mentioned by Ibn Abi Dunya in Makayid al-Shaytan. Ibn Abi Dunya had some of the most beautiful books written in the history of Islam. All of them, or a vast majority of them, had to do with what? Huh? No, the vast majority of his works had to do with things that, were pertinent to admonition. So he'd bring things about akhlaq, he'd bring things about wara', taqwa, makaid al-shaytan, these kind of things, the traps of shaytan. So these were the type of things that what he would usually do is, he'd bring different narrations and different traditions of the Salaf, and he was from the early generations himself, and he would write and collect basically these traditions. And with that story being said, we'll stop. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.